My name is Emily. Today, I am a woman who controls empires. I am a millionaire, a CEO, and when I walk into a boardroom, the room goes silent. People look at my tailored suits, my private jets, and the unshakable confidence in my eyes, and they make assumptions. They think I was born into wealth. They think I am just another privileged elite who never knew the taste of hunger or the bite of winter. But they don't know the truth. They don't know that my entire empire was built on a foundation of frozen tears, broken promises, and the cold concrete of betrayal. 7 years ago, I wasn't a powerful businesswoman. I was nothing but trash, thrown out into the mud by the very people who had sworn before God to protect me. To understand my success, you must first understand the true horrors of how it all began. I didn't grow up in luxury. My father was a night shift janitor, a man who cleaned school toilets and swept floors until his knuckles bled and his bones ached, just to make sure there was a single loaf of bread on our dinner table. I grew up knowing the suffocating smell of poverty, the constant anxiety of unpaid rent, and the judgment of a world that measures your worth by the balance in your bank account. I learned early on to keep my head down and just survive. But then, destiny threw a curveball into my life. I met David. David was everything I wasn't. He belonged to the elite Vanguard family, an old money dynasty in Connecticut that possessed billions, controlled politicians, and looked at people from my background as if we were a biological virus. But David was different. He didn't care about my lack of status or my cheap clothes. He saw my soul. He loved me with a fierce, unquestioning devotion. When his mother, Eleanor, found out about our relationship, she offered my father money to force me to leave. When that failed, she threatened to disown David. But David chose me. He walked away from his family's corporate throne, took a simple job, and married me in a small, empty chapel. For a brief moment, I genuinely believed I had found my heaven. I believed that love was an impenetrable shield that could save me from the harsh realities of the world. Voice cracks, tone shifts into deep sorrow, holding back heavy sobs, but shields shatter, and heaven never lasts for the poor. 2 weeks before I was due to give birth to our first child, the universe tore my world apart. It was a freezing winter night, and David was driving home from his shift. The roads were treacherous, covered in a thin, invisible layer of black ice. A massive semi-truck lost control on the highway, crossed the center line, and crushed David's small car instantly. My husband, my anchor, my protector, the only person who had ever made me feel safe in this cruel world, was wiped out in a fraction of a second. He died before he could ever hold his son. I was left 9 months pregnant, broken, and completely devastated. With no income and a baby on the way, I had no choice but to swallow my pride and crawl back to his family's massive, freezing estate. Eleanor and her younger son, Richard, allowed me to stay in a small, damp room in the servants' wing. I thought their grief would match mine. I foolishly prayed that when they saw the baby, their icy hearts would melt and they would see David's reflection in his eyes. Oh God, how naive I was. I didn't realize I was walking straight into a viper's nest. Tone becomes terrified, breathing turns shallow and rapid, filled with panic. The nightmare reached its absolute peak on a Tuesday midnight, exactly 40 days after my son Noah was born. The baby was suffering from a severe case of infant colic, his tiny body burning with a terrifying fever. He was crying uncontrollably, his high-pitched shrieks echoing through the cold walls of the room. I hadn't slept in 3 consecutive days, my eyes were bloodshot, and I was shivering, wearing David's old, oversized grey sweater just to feel a fading sense of his warmth. Suddenly, without a single warning, the heavy oak door of my bedroom shattered open, slamming against the wall. Eleanor and Richard stood in the doorway. The hallway lights behind them cast long, demonic shadows across the floor. Their faces were completely expressionless, their eyes colder than the winter storm howling outside. "Get out of my house, Emily," Eleanor said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was incredibly sharp, cutting through the silence of the night like a guillotine blade. I froze in terror, clutching Noah tightly against my chest to protect him from their gaze. "What? Eleanor, please, it's midnight. Noah is burning up with a fever, he is sick." Richard stepped forward, a disgusting, arrogant sneer twisted across his face. You heard her, trailer park trash. Your free ride is officially over. David is dead, and your tie to this family died with him. Did you really think we would let a penniless janitor's daughter raise a child on our fortune? We've already altered the estate documents and finalized the legal paperwork. You have absolutely no right to this property, no right to David's name, and no right to a single dollar of the Vanguard estate. Grab your pathetic rags and get out. You have 5 minutes before the security guards drag you out by your hair. Voice breaks completely into loud, agonizing weeping and desperate screaming. I dropped heavily to my knees onto the freezing marble floor, the coldness biting straight into my skin. Tears blinded my eyes as I looked up at the woman who had given birth to the man I loved. Please, I begged, my voice cracking into a raw, painful scream. Please, Eleanor, look at him. He is David's son. He is your own flesh and blood, your grandson. He is only 40 days old. Look at the weather outside, it's a torrential downpour, the temperature is freezing. We have nowhere to go. My father's place is miles away. Please, I beg you on my knees, let us just stay in the hallway until the morning. Don't do this to a baby. But Eleanor didn't even blink. There was no mercy in her eyes, no humanity left in her soul. She had a stone in her chest where a heart should be. She reached down, grabbed my bare arm with her sharp, manicured nails digging deep into my skin, and violently dragged me across the floor. Noah was shrieking in absolute terror, his tiny hands clawing helplessly at the air. Richard grabbed my single, worn-out duffel bag and threw it down the grand staircase. They dragged me down the steps, opened the massive front door, and shoved me out into the pouring, freezing rain. Sound effect: a massive, deafening thunderclap shakes the entire house, followed instantly by the violent slam of the heavy wooden door and the loud, metallic click of the deadbolt locking from the inside. The door closed. Locked. The lights inside the grand mansion began to turn off one by one, plunging the entire estate into total darkness, leaving us completely abandoned. I stood there in the mud, shivering violently, bleeding from recent postpartum complications, holding a 40-day-old sick baby wrapped in nothing but a thin, soaking wet blanket. I turned around and began pounding on the thick, impenetrable wood of the door with my bare hands. I screamed until my throat tore and left red bloodstains on the white paint. Please open the door. Just let me get his medicine. Don't kill my baby. Please, Richard. Eleanor. No one answered. The only response was the aggressive wind howling through the trees and the choking, suffocating cries of my freezing child. I collapsed onto the muddy concrete, pulling Noah under my wet sweater, trying to give him the last bit of my body heat. I looked up at the black storm clouds, the rain washing away my tears, and I realized that in this world, no one was coming to save us. If we survived this night, I swore to God, I would make them pay for every single drop of rain that fell on my son. Sound effect: the violent sound of heavy rain and howling wind continues from part 1, slowly fading into the distant, chaotic noises of city traffic, car horns, and footsteps on wet pavement. A low, melancholic cello melody plays in the background. The human body is a strange thing. It can freeze, it can bleed, it can ache until you think you are going to die, but your heart just keeps beating. That night, after Eleanor and Richard locked the doors of their mansion, I didn't die. I wanted to. God knows I prayed for the ground to open up and swallow me whole. But when I looked down at Noah, his tiny lips turning blue under my soaked sweater, I realized I didn't have the luxury of dying. I had to live. For him. I walked for miles in that freezing storm, clutching my 40-day-old son to my chest. My body was broken, bleeding from recent childbirth, and every step felt like shards of glass forcing their way into my bones. By the time the sun crawled over the horizon, painting the sky in a miserable gray, I found myself in the underbelly of the city. The wealthy Connecticut suburbs were gone. Here, there were no mansions. Only broken asphalt, overflowing trash cans, and the smell of exhaust fumes and despair. I had no money. Not a single penny. My phone had been smashed during the struggle with Richard, and my father's old apartment was empty. He had passed away 6 months before David, leaving behind nothing but debts. I was completely, utterly alone. Voice drops into a low, trembling whisper, filled with shame and raw pain. Have you ever looked into the eyes of a stranger and begged? It strips away every single ounce of your dignity. I sat on a piece of cardboard outside a 24-hour convenience store, holding Noah. People walked past me. Men in expensive business suits, women carrying luxury handbags. They looked at me with disgust. To them, I wasn't a grieving widow. I wasn't a mother trying to save her child. I was just an eyesore. A piece of human garbage cluttering their clean sidewalks. Please, I whispered to a man who stopped to buy a newspaper. Please, my baby is sick. Just $5 for his medicine. Please. He didn't even look at me. He just stepped over my legs, muttered "get a job, parasite," and walked away. That word. Parasite. It was the same word Eleanor used. The rich all speak the same language when they look at the poor. Sound effect, a heavy metallic clatter, followed by the sound of coins dropping into a plastic cup. The only person who helped me that day was an old homeless man named Marcus. He had lost his legs to frostbite years ago and sat in a wheelchair nearby. He rolled over to me, looked at Noah's pale face, and handed me a crumpled $5 bill and a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in paper. "Eat it, girl," Marcus said, his voice raspy from years of breathing street dust. "If you dry up, the milk stops. If the milk stops, the boy dies. Don't let them win." I devoured that stale sandwich like it was a feast. I took that $5 bill, ran to a nearby pharmacy, and bought the cheapest fever drops I could find. I sat in a public restroom, using the warm tap water to wash Noah's face, and forced the medicine down his throat. As he finally drifted into a quiet sleep, his fever slowly breaking, I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of that public bathroom. My face was bruised, my hair was matted with mud, and my eyes looked dead. The Emily who loved poetry, the Emily who smiled when David kissed her, she was dead. She died in the rain outside the Vanguard mansion. The woman looking back at me now was a stranger. A dangerous stranger. Tone hardens, becoming cold, sharp, and filled with a quiet, burning rage. For the next 6 months, the streets became our home. We lived in a crumbling, abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. It had no electricity, no running water, and when winter returned, the wind blew through the shattered windows like a million tiny knives. I worked 3 different under-the-table jobs just to afford a cheap tin of baby formula and a small room's rent in a dangerous boarding house. In the mornings, I scrubbed the grease off restaurant kitchen floors until my hands were raw and bleeding. In the afternoons, I sorted through rotten vegetables at a wholesale market, taking home the pieces they threw away. At night, when Noah was sleeping in a makeshift crib made of a cardboard box, I cleaned the offices of a tech company in downtown. It was during those midnight shifts at the tech company that something inside me shifted. I would empty the trash cans of 20-something software engineers, looking at their glowing computer monitors left on overnight. I saw lines of code, strange, colorful text that looked like a foreign language. I noticed the sticky notes on their desks boasting about their 6-figure salaries, their bonuses, their stocks. They were making more money in a single day than my father made in a year, just by typing on a keyboard. One night, as I was wiping down the desk of a senior developer, I found a discarded, thick textbook in the recycling bin. The title was Introduction to Computer Science and Python Development. The cover was torn, and some pages were stained with coffee. I looked at the book, then looked at my reflection in the dark glass window of the skyscraper. I could hear Richard's voice echoing in my head, "You are nothing but a penniless janitor's daughter." I picked the book out of the trash. I hid it inside my cleaning cart. That night, under the dim light of a street lamp outside our abandoned warehouse, while Noah slept soundly, I opened the first page. I didn't have a computer. I didn't have internet. I had nothing but a broken pencil I found on the floor and my own mind. I began to write lines of code on the margins of old newspapers. Every night, while my body screamed for sleep, My brain fought for survival. I memorized algorithms. I drew logic gates on cardboard boxes. I learned how to build databases using nothing but my imagination. The other homeless people in the warehouse thought I was losing my mind, talking to myself in the dark, writing gibberish on trash. But I wasn't losing my mind. For the first time in 7 months, I was finding it. Eleanor and Richard thought they had destroyed me when they threw me out into the storm. They thought poverty would swallow me whole and erase David's bloodline from the face of the earth. But they made a fatal mistake. They left me alive. And as long as I was breathing, I was going to build a weapon out of nothing but logic and rage. Sound effect, the soft, rhythmic tapping of computer keyboard keys, fast and steady. A low, driving electronic synth beat begins to play in the background, signaling a shift from tragedy to intense focus and momentum. They say that a cornered animal is the most dangerous creature on earth. I was that animal. For 2 long years, my life was split into 2 brutal realities. By day, I was Emily the ghost, the invisible woman who washed dishes, swept floors, and smelled of cheap cleaning chemicals. But by night, under the flickering yellow light of a stolen desk lamp in that freezing warehouse, I was someone else. I was a creator. I had managed to buy a second-hand, half-broken laptop from a pawn shop for $40, money I saved by skipping meals for 2 months. The battery was dead, so it always had to be plugged into a sketchy, bypassed electrical outlet in the warehouse wall. The screen had a massive crack down the middle, splitting my lines of code in half. But to me, that junk machine was a golden key. It was my portal out of hell. Noah was 2 years old now. He didn't know what a toy store looked like. He didn't know the taste of chocolate. His playground was the concrete floor of our warehouse, and his toys were the plastic bottle caps I brought home from work. Every time I looked at him playing in the dirt, a cold, sharp blade of guilt pierced my chest. But that guilt didn't make me cry anymore. It hardened into steel. Tone becomes highly focused, sharp, and business-minded. I realized that the tech companies I cleaned for were missing something massive. They were all building software for rich people, apps to deliver gourmet food, apps to book luxury rides, apps to manage stock portfolios. None of them were building tools for the billions of ordinary, working-class people who actually kept the world running. They didn't understand the logistics of small businesses, independent suppliers, or local truck drivers. But I did. My father had been a worker, and I had spent 2 years working in wholesale markets and commercial kitchens. I knew exactly where the system was broken. I began coding a logistics platform. I called it Vanguard Nexus, a deliberate, bitter irony aimed at the family that destroyed me. It was an automated system designed to connect local farmers, independent truck drivers, and small grocery stores directly, cutting out the greedy corporate middlemen who inflated prices. I wrote the code entirely by myself, line by line, night after night, while my fingers stiffened from the winter chill. But code is useless without execution. I needed an investor. I needed someone to look past my faded jeans, my cheap shoes, and my exhausted eyes and see the revolutionary genius of my platform. For 3 months, I sent out hundreds of emails to venture capitalists. Most of them went straight to the spam folder. A few assistants replied with polite, automated rejections. To them, I was a nobody with no degree, no background, and no pedigree. Then, I got one breakthrough. A minor investment firm, managed by an old, eccentric billionaire named Arthur Pendleton, was holding an open pitch event in downtown. Anyone could walk in and have exactly 3 minutes to present their idea. Voice drops into an intense, suspenseful tone, heartbeat sound effect rises faintly. I remember that day like it was yesterday. I didn't have money for a proper business suit. I went to a charity thrift store and bought a faded navy blazer that was slightly too big for me. I washed my face in the public fountain outside the corporate skyscraper, tied my hair back tightly, and looked up at the glass monolith. When I walked into the presentation room, the judges looked at me like I was a lost cleaning lady. Some of them actually laughed. "You have 3 minutes, young lady," Arthur Pendleton said, his voice deep and gravelly, his eyes scanning my cheap clothes. "Make it count." I didn't use a flashy PowerPoint presentation. I didn't use complicated corporate buzzwords. I walked straight to the whiteboard, grabbed a black marker, and drew a map of the state's supply chain. Right now, I began, my voice steady, loud, and completely devoid of fear. Your corporate supply chains are losing 40% of their revenue to corrupt middlemen, inefficient routing, and outdated communication. You think the solution is bigger trucks and more warehouses. You are wrong. The solution is coordination. My software automates the entire distribution network in real time. It predicts shortages before they happen and routes local drivers within seconds. I didn't build this in a university lab. I built this on the streets. I know it works because I've tested it manually with 20 independent drivers in the industrial district. In 30 days, I've increased their profit margins by 60%. The room went completely silent. The judges who had been smirking suddenly sat up straight. Arthur Pendleton took off his glasses, leaning forward. "And how much funding are you asking for, Emily?" he asked. I looked him dead in the eye. "I don't want your funding, Mr. Pendleton. I want a partnership. Give me $50,000 for server infrastructure and access to your network of distributors. In return, I will give you 15% of a company that will control the national logistics market within 5 years. If I fail, you lose 50 grand, a rounding error on your tax returns. If I succeed, you become a multi-billionaire all over again." Voice swells with immense pride and triumph. Arthur Pendleton stared at me for what felt like an eternity. The other judges began to whisper, telling him it was too risky, that I was uneducated, that my background was sketchy. But Arthur was a self-made man himself. He saw the fire in my eyes, the kind of fire that only burns in people who have survived the absolute bottom of hell. He slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. "Done," he barked. $50,000. You start tomorrow. Let's see if you're a genius or a lunatic, Emily. That night, I didn't walk back to the warehouse. I ran. I burst through the rusted doors, grabbed Noah into my arms, and spun him around while tears of pure joy streamed down my face. For the first time in his life, we didn't eat stale bread. I bought a whole roasted chicken and a fresh carton of milk. As I watched my son eat his fill, I looked out the broken window toward the wealthy horizon where the Vanguard family lived. The foundation was laid. The engine was running. "Eleanor, Richard, your countdown has officially begun." Sound effect. A powerful, upbeat corporate cinematic music track begins. The sound of camera flashes, roaring crowds at a tech conference, and the sleek chime of luxury glass doors opening. Money is a funny thing. When you don't have it, it's a monster that suffocates you every single second of the day. But when you master it, it becomes an invisible army that fights your battles while you sleep. The 3 years following my meeting with Arthur Pendleton were a blur of sleepless nights, high-stakes boardroom battles, and relentless growth. Vanguard Nexus didn't just succeed, it exploded like a supernova in the tech and logistics industry. Small businesses, independent shipping lines, and massive retail chains realized that my platform was saving them millions of dollars in waste. By the second year, we were processing over 50 million transactions a day. By the third year, Arthur Pendleton's 15% share was worth hundreds of millions. And my share. I was officially a multimillionaire. I moved Noah out of that rat-infested warehouse and into a beautiful, sunlit penthouse overlooking the city. For the first time, my son had a bedroom of his own, filled with toys, books, and soft blankets. He had a private tutor, a security detail, and the best healthcare money could buy. Every time I watched him laugh, playing in our rooftop garden, the cold ice around my heart would melt just a little bit. I had saved him. I had beaten the streets. Tone shifts into a cold, calculated, and predatory composure, but my work wasn't done. Survival was just phase 1. Phase 2 was execution. I hadn't forgotten the storm. I hadn't forgotten the mud. And most importantly, I hadn't forgotten Eleanor and Richard Vanguard. While I was building my empire, I kept a silent, predatory eye on the Vanguard family dynasty. Old money breeds arrogance, and arrogance breeds stupidity. Eleanor and Richard thought their wealth was an eternal castle that could never be shaken. Richard, who had taken over the family's shipping and real estate conglomerate after David's death, was a reckless, short-sighted gambler. He poured billions into failing overseas real estate markets and took massive, high-interest loans from international banks to keep their lifestyle afloat. They didn't realize that the world had changed. They were still running their business using 19th-century methods, while Vanguard Nexus was automating the entire industry. One by one, I quietly began buying up their clients. I offered their shipping partners better rates, faster routing, and absolute transparency. Within 24 months, the Vanguard Group lost nearly 70% of its domestic contracts. Their revenue plummeted, their stock prices crashed into the dirt, and panic broke out in their boardroom. Voice drops into a dark, plotting whisper, they were desperate. They needed a massive injection of cash to save themselves from bankruptcy. And that was exactly when I laid my trap. I created a shell corporation, a massive, anonymous private equity firm based out of Delaware called Nemesis Holdings. Through an intermediary, I offered the Vanguard Group a lifeline, a $300 million loan. The interest rate was incredibly low, almost too good to be true. But hidden deep within the 100-page legal contract, written in tiny, complex legalese by the best corporate lawyers money could buy, was a specific clause. A collateral clause. If the Vanguard Group missed even a single quarterly payment, or if their debt-to-equity ratio fell below a certain threshold, Nemesis Holdings would have the automatic, non-negotiable legal right to seize all of their assets. Their shipping ports, their corporate offices, their bank accounts, and their ancestral family mansion in Connecticut. Richard, blind with desperation and eager to prove to his mother that he had saved the company, signed the contract without a second thought. He took my money, popped a bottle of expensive champagne, and celebrated his brilliant business move. He had no idea he had just signed their death warrant. Sound effect, a sudden, sharp sound of a gavel banging, followed by the cold, mechanical hum of a printer outputting legal eviction notices. 6 months later, the trap snapped shut. The global market took a slight downturn, and the Vanguard Group's remaining overseas investments completely collapsed. They missed their first payment to Nemesis Holdings. I remember sitting in my office on the top floor of my glass skyscraper, watching the sunset, when my assistant walked in and handed me a document. It was the final foreclosure notice. The Vanguard dynasty was officially bankrupt. Their stocks were worthless, their corporate assets were frozen, and by tomorrow morning, everything they owned belonged to me. I stood up, walked to the massive glass window, and looked at my reflection. I wasn't wearing a faded, oversized gray sweater anymore. I was wearing a bespoke, thousands of dollars black designer suit. My eyes were completely calm. I picked up my phone and dialed my head of security. "Get the cars ready," I ordered, my voice dropping into a freezing, razor-sharp register. "And check the weather forecast for tonight. It's supposed to be a severe thunderstorm," my security chief replied. "Heavy downpour, high winds, and a massive drop in temperature." I smiled. A cold, dark, terrifying smile. "Perfect," I whispered. "History loves to repeat itself. It's time to pay a visit to my mother-in-law." Sound effect, the intense, deafening sound of a violent thunderstorm returns. Heavy rain lashes against windows, and loud cracks of thunder boom repeatedly, echoing the exact atmosphere of Part 1. A slow, heavy, dramatic orchestral theme builds up. 7 years. It took exactly 2,555 days for the wheels of justice to turn completely. But they did. The rain was pouring in torrents as my black luxury SUV convoy pulled up the long, winding driveway of the Vanguard estate. The headlights cut through the thick darkness, illuminating the grand, white stone mansion. It looked exactly the same as it did the night I was thrown out. The same towering pillars, the same massive oak doors. But the power inside was gone. The windows were dark, save for a single dim light burning in the main living room. I stepped out of the car. My security guards held a large black umbrella over my head, protecting my designer suit from the rain. I walked up the grand stone steps, my high heels clicking sharply against the marble. Each step felt like a victory lap. I didn't knock. My legal team and 2 court-appointed bailiffs stood behind me with the official foreclosure and eviction warrants. One of my security guards pushed the heavy oak doors open. Sound effect: the heavy wooden door creaks open loudly, followed by the sound of thunder echoing inside the empty house. Inside, the grand hall was freezing. The heating had been turned off because the bills hadn't been paid. Standing near the grand staircase, huddled together under a single wool blanket, were Eleanor and Richard Vanguard. They looked broken. The arrogance was entirely gone from Richard's face, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked like a ghost. Eleanor sat in a chair, her hands shaking, her expensive jewelry gone, looking like a frail, defeated old woman. "Who are you?" Richard shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "The court said the owner of Nemesis Holdings was coming tonight. You have no right to barge into our home with security. We are appealing the foreclosure." I stepped forward, moving out of the shadow of my guards, letting the dim light fall directly onto my face. I looked straight into Eleanor's eyes. "Hello, Eleanor," I said. My voice was calm, soft, yet colder than the ice outside. "It's been a long time." Voice drops into a chilling, absolute stillness. Eleanor gasped, her eyes widening in pure horror. She tried to stand up, but her knees buckled, and she fell back into her chair. "You, Emily? No. This is impossible. You're dead. You were supposed to die in the gutter." "You wanted me to die, Eleanor," I replied, taking a step closer, my eyes locking onto hers like a predator. "You threw me and David's 40-day-old son out into a storm just like this one. You locked these exact doors. You watched through the window as my child turned blue from the cold. You thought poverty would erase us. But you forgot one thing: you can't kill a woman who has nothing left to lose." Richard stepped forward, his face turning pale as realization hit him. You are the owner of Nemesis Holdings. You bought our debt. You destroyed our companies. Every single one of them, Richard," I said, tilting my head with a ruthless smile. "Every client you lost, every contract that vanished, every loan you took, it was all me. I built a multimillion-dollar empire just to dismantle yours piece by piece. I own your shipping lines. I own your bank accounts. And as of exactly 12 o'clock tonight, I own this house." Tone becomes intensely dramatic, authoritative, and unyielding. The court bailiff stepped forward, handing the official eviction documents to Richard. "Mr. Vanguard, Mrs. Vanguard, by order of the state court, you are ordered to vacate these premises immediately. All assets inside this house now belong to the corporate entity managed by Madam Emily. Please, Emily." Richard suddenly broke down, dropping to his knees, mimicking the exact posture I had taken 7 years ago. Tears of desperation streamed down his face. "We have nowhere to go. All our accounts are frozen. It's midnight, look at the storm outside. Let us just stay in the servants' wing until morning. Don't do this to my mother, she is old, she is sick." I looked down at Richard kneeling in the mud of his own making. I looked at Eleanor, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. For a split second, the ghost of old Emily whispered in my ear, asking for mercy. But then, I remembered the public restroom where I had to wash my son. I remembered Marcus, the homeless man who gave me $5 to save Noah's life. I remembered the red bloodstains on these very doors from my bare hands. My heart remained absolute steel. "You have 5 minutes, Richard," I said, repeating his exact words from 7 years ago. "Grab your pathetic rags and get out. My security guards will drag you out by your hair if you delay." Sound effect: a massive, definitive thunderclap shakes the entire house. 5 minutes later, my guards escorted Eleanor and Richard out of the grand entrance. They stood in the driveway, shivering violently under the torrential downpour, soaked to the skin, completely penniless and homeless. I walked to the massive oak door. I looked out at them one last time. There was no joy in my heart, only a profound, echoing silence. The debt had been paid. The circle was complete. I grabbed the heavy brass handle, pulled the door shut, and turned the heavy deadbolt lock. Sound effect: the heavy wooden door slams shut with an echoing boom, followed by the loud, metallic click of the lock. The storm outside fades slightly, replaced by a beautiful, triumphant, and peaceful piano melody. I walked back out to my car, where Noah was waiting for me in the back seat, sleeping peacefully under a warm, silk blanket. He was safe. His future was secure. His mother had conquered the world that tried to destroy him. My name is Emily. I rose from the ashes of betrayal, and I built an empire out of nothing but logic, pain, and a mother's love. To anyone out there who is currently sitting in the dark, shivering in the rain, listening to my voice, hear me clearly. Do not cry. Do not beg. Do not wait for someone to save you. Survive. Learn. Build. And let your success be the loudest thunder the world has ever heard. Sound effect. The music rises to a grand, emotional crescendo and then slowly fades away into absolute silence.